Hello and welcome back to this video series on research methods and writing. In this video, we're going to get a little philosophical, little warning, but it's for a reason. We're going to talk about paradigms in academic fields. And you may wonder what a paradigm is. I'll explain that. In the 1950s, a scientist named Thomas Kuhn turned more towards philosophy and philosophizing about science. And he published a famous book. It's called The Structure of Scientific Revolutions. He talks about normal science and he talks about revolutions in science when big changes and upheavals happen. We're not going to talk about the revolutions here. We're going to talk about normal science, what he characterizes as normal science. And I find this applies to any kind of field, whether it's science or literature, research, or linguistics, or whatever. He talked about how scientists in a different field really belong to what's called a paradigm, a research paradigm, or an academic paradigm. And it's like a worldview. It's like your academic worldview, your worldview as a scientist. How you see the world. And if you're a theoretical physicist, you see the world in a very unique way. If you're an ecologist, you see the world in your own particular way. If you're a linguist, different kinds of linguists see the world in somewhat different ways. Their world, how they view their world, their research and what they study and what they do. That's their world to them. So it's a worldview, to use a philosophical term. So to begin with, why am I talking about all of this? I'm going to kind of tie everything together a little bit later, but this all relates to the kind of academic writing that you do in your particular field. Whether your field is British poetry or literature analysis in general, or sociolinguistics or applied linguistics or engineering or urban planning or genetic biology or whatever. This is all relevant. These philosophical aspects affect the kind of research you do, which affects the kind of writing that people do in your field and how writers communicate with each other. All right, so to begin with, in your field or maybe your subfield, you have fields and subfields and such. We can talk about paradigms and subparadigms. We'll just talk about like whatever field you're in. Think of literature research, think of linguistics, or think of culture studies, or whatever it is you're interested in here. Well, there's at least one theory that you follow. Now, in some fields, you work with multiple theories, but we'll just focus on maybe one theory, one of those theories. And along with that theory comes a whole worldview, the way you view the world, the way you view your field. And to use a philosophical term, that includes what's called ontology, what exists. Okay, what exists in your world? If you are a linguist, you live in a world in which language is something that exists, that's important to you, and it's different from what ordinary people understand as language. Remember, we talked about academic vocabulary and how words have a different meaning in academic context. Language has a slightly different thing. It's like something that it's like an ability or faculty in the mind, or maybe it's a social thing as well. But language is something that exists in your world, and languages, different languages. Language exists maybe as more of a cognitive kind of concept, or as a social concept, or some other perspective that you have on language, maybe a communication aspect or such. Those are the things that exist in your world, languages and dialects and different ways of speaking and things like that. Along with that come certain goals and questions or values. Let's say linguists, for example, are interested in understanding how language works. Maybe understanding how language works in the mind, or how it works in social interaction and communication. And linguists don't care about imposing some idea of correct grammar. Linguists are actually against that. That's not one of our values. It's not something we believe in. That doesn't exist in our mindset, in our world. There's no such thing as a correct way to speak the language. There are different levels, like formal language and informal language, and their dialects, all of those are valid and worth studying and worth understanding and even worth preserving. Different social levels, from formal to informal, dialects, different regional varieties. None of them are correct. That's a value judgment. We don't believe in value judgments. We are interested in understanding these all because these all help us to understand how language works here, or what makes up language in the stuff of language. We are interested in describing and analyzing languages, not imposing some artificial ideals about correct grammar. We just don't believe in that. Some linguists value the more abstract theoretical components of language. Some linguists value the more psychological and cognitive aspects of language. Some linguists care about the social aspects, social interaction, communication. Some linguists are more interested in the teaching aspects and learning aspects. Those are different goals and questions and values that different groups of linguists have. And you could say the same thing you could go through and look at literature and analysis people, or historians, or computer science computer engineers, or geneticists, or whatever field. You can go through and talk about the same thing. They have certain goals and questions, things that they care about, things that they ask about. How does this work? Why does it work that way? Different things that exist in their world. Along with that comes epistemology. Epistemology is a philosophical term meaning what we know and how we know things. In terms of academic research, how do we find out new things? In other words, the research methods and why. And so let's say you're a scientist. You believe in an objective reality that's there. Does it depend on who's observing it or anything? Scientists are kind of realists. They believe in reality that's there regardless of whether humans exist or not, or whether humans interact with it. It's just there. It's a very objective worldview. And so the research methods are very objective, quantitative, scientific research methods. For some fields, the epistemology is not so much objective. So when it comes to literature research, are you seeking objective truth about the world? No. It's about understanding literature, how language is used in literature, and it's about understanding human experience, the human condition, things like that. It's not objective. The goals are not objective. They're more social, they're more subjective, or even intersubjective, communicating with the reader, like when a poet communicates with the reader through her poetry. The poet is making a connection with the reader somehow, and the reader is connecting with the poet. There's an intersubjective quality to literature, and a subjective quality. The writer is expressing her views and her values and her understanding of the world. That means the research methods are different. In a social field where you're looking at the social aspects of language and communication, your epistemology is not so much objective. You're studying humans, and humans are complicated. You're studying how human culture works. That's really complicated and messy. You maybe can't use objective, quantitative research methods for that. It's more complicated. It's a little more subjective. It's more qualitative. Not that your tone of writing is going to be very subjective, but there's a certain subjective quality to that. Things depend on your interpretation. Which theory do I choose to use? Is my interpretation valid here? How do I interpret, this interview data? How do these learners of English interpret their experiences as students learning English in a foreign language context? There's a certain sort of there's a certain subjective quality sometimes to some of this. That's a different kind of epistemology, which justifies maybe more qualitative research methods. Along with the idea of goals and questions and values and what exists in your world, and the theory that you work within, the theory that defines your goals and questions and research methods, there's a community. People who are interested in a particular academic topic or research area, particularly the scholars, the researchers, the professors, the graduate students, people who do work on this. and maybe others who want to access this because they want to know for some reason. There's a community. So that means the scholars or scientists are following certain research methods, and they write about them in a way that communicates to the community of other scholars or scientists who are interested in this in a way that makes sense to them. If you're a scientist, you're going to communicate and write things in a certain way. You're going to do an experiment because that's your epistemology, your view of the world, and you're going to write about it in a very objective way. It might sound dry to other people, but it's the way that your community understands. It's what they are expecting. They're expecting very objective, heavy, very informative, informational scientific papers that persuasively show you found something new, you found something interesting, using the scientific method and communicating it in a very structured and often dense sounding way. If you are an applied linguist, you are following certain research questions and using certain research methods and then communicating them to a way in academic writing to a community of other scholars who are interested in that. And so the way you do that is going to be very different, depending on, first of all, whether you choose to use qualitative or quantitative research methods or a mixture of both together in the same paper. That's going to affect the style of writing, the tone of your writing, what they are expecting in your paper, and the way that you write and phrase your sentences in your paragraphs, the kind of support, the contents of the body paragraphs, what kind of support is in there for your ideas, whether it's hard empirical data or statistical analysis or interpretation based on some critical theory or something like that. The community is your audience. If you're a writer, you're writing for a potential audience or readership. That's sort of the scholarly community, at least theoretically, that you are writing to when you write an academic paper and you do research on a topic and you write a paper. Your hypothetical audience is the community of other people who are interested in this topic, who expect certain things from you. If you're a researcher, your community of fellow scholars expects certain things when you write a paper, when you publish a paper. That's the community. So it affects the writing style, the tone, the way papers are structured and organized. So all of this, philosophically speaking, is what Thomas Kuhn called a paradigm. It's the theory that you work in, and along with that, the different goals and questions and values, and epistemology and research methods, and the community that you belong to. This is a paradigm. And of course, you can get more complicated. You can talk about sub-paradigms and subfields. As a linguist, for example, I work within different sub-areas of linguistics, and I kind of move in and out from one theory to another depending on which project I'm working on. Okay, we won't get into that here. That's not relevant. But the paradigm is your worldview as an academic person. And this mainly is relevant for professors and people who are full-time professional academic researchers and scholars and scientists in fields, but you as a student are sort of joining this paradigm as kind of beginners. And whether or not you can continue in this field for the rest of your life, that's up to you. If you want to go into full-time research and teaching and academic work or scholarly work, that's cool. But if not, you might be in an occupation where you sometimes have to read the literature in the field. Let's say you're going to be a school counselor. Well, you're going to have to keep up with research in educational psychology and counseling psychology. Maybe you're working in business and you're going to keep up with some of the research that comes from business analysts, for example. Or at least you're going to have to write papers for your college classes and get a better understanding of, okay, why do we write papers like this? Even like, why do we use the citation system? Why does the citation system, like the APA and certain linguistics papers or the Chicago style and humanities papers, why does it look like that? Well, different kinds of information are highlighted differently by the different citation systems because, well, that's what's important to that field, to the scholars in that field. So academic writing is shaped by the paradigm. The paradigm greatly influences the research methods and all of that. The goals, the questions, the research methods, the community, these shape the nature of academic writing in your field, no matter what your field is. It shapes the purpose of the writing, the research methods, the style and structure of papers, the tone of your paper, whether you're going to sound impressive, eloquent as a literary scholar, or dry and objective and as a scientist, or whatever. It influences the readership or audience of your writing, which is the community of other people in that field. The research paradigm shapes the writing. And Thomas Kuhn intended this mainly for understanding science, but a lot of this is valid for any academic field. And this in turn is relevant to understanding writing in your field. That's why I've been discussing all of this stuff. The science stuff, the nomenclature, research methods. This is why. Leads all to this, the stuff about paradigms. Now, Thomas Kuhn's book has been pretty influential in various parts of the science community and philosophy community and philosophy of science. And there are some people who debate his ideas, and that's not relevant here. You could read Thomas Kuhn's book if you're interested, especially if you're interested in the history of science and philosophy of science, or just understanding your own field more. If you're going to go to graduate school, if you're going for a PhD, no matter what your field is, read Thomas Kuhn's book. Whether you agree with his ideas or not, there's some of his ideas that are open to debate. It's nonetheless really helpful for thinking more about your field and understanding your field and writing in your field. So that's why I talk about all this stuff. It's actually helpful for academic people to understand themselves in their field better. Hope this will help you after you digest some of this. And your brain is probably full, so take a rest. Come back to the next video. I'll see you later. Goodbye.